February 14th, 1986, a hospital corridor in Hong Kong, 7 in the morning. The doctor was holding an X-ray up to the light. He had been a physician for 19 years. He had treated construction workers and factory workers and the occasional stuntman from the film studios in Kowloon, and he had learned, over those 19 years, to read damage in bone and tissue the way a mechanic reads wear, clinically, without editorializing. But he stood in that corridor on that February morning and looked at what the X-ray showed, and then he looked at the man sitting on the examination table, and he did something that surprised even him. He looked back at the X-ray, because the man on the table was sitting upright, which, given what the X-ray showed, was not something the man on the table should have been able to do without assistance. The film was Project A Part 2. The production records from this period confirm the location and the general timeline of what happened. What they do not record, what production records are not designed to record, is what was said in that corridor and what was decided there, and what the consequences of that decision turned out to be over the following 6 weeks. What the doctor said, according to accounts that have circulated in the Hong Kong film community for decades, was something approximating this, that the injury to the spine was significant, that the surrounding damage was significant, that the honest medical projection was a recovery measured in months, and a return to the kind of physical performance this man's career required measured in longer than that, if at all. He used the language that doctors use when they are being careful, which is to say, he did not say never, but the shape of what he was describing in its honest outline was that the man on the table was looking at the end of something. Jackie Chan listened to all of it. Then he asked when he could go back to work. To understand why that question was not as simple as it sounds, you need to understand what the work was. By 1986, Jackie Chan was 31 years old, 5 feet 9, and had been performing physical work at an intensity that would have ended most careers before his had properly begun. The China Drama Academy had given him a foundation, 10 years of training that started when he was approximately 7 years old and did not stop until he was approximately 17. Training that produced in him a body that could do things bodies are not naturally designed to do, governed by a mind that had been thoroughly and systematically taught that the body's objections were not stops but negotiations. He had been beaten for weakness. He had been beaten for error. He had been trained in the specific and ancient tradition of the Peking Opera School system, which prioritized total physical transformation over the comfort of the people being transformed, and which had been doing so for generations before Jackie Chan arrived on its floors, and would continue doing so after he left. The floors were wooden and worn smooth by the time he arrived. Decades of bare feet and falling bodies had polished them to a near frictionless surface that caught the early morning light in the practice hall in a way that was almost beautiful, though nobody in that hall had the surplus attention to notice. The music, strings and percussion, Peking opera instrumentation, ran under every session until it stopped being music and became the sound of the thing they were inside, the constant accompaniment of a life that had, for the duration of their enrollment, been entirely determined by someone else. Master Yu Jim Yuan's voice carried across the courtyard before the sun was fully up. The boys slept 4 hours, maybe 5, on thin mats in rows. Sammo Hung slept nearby. Yuan Biao would follow. What those 10 years produced in Jackie Chan was not separable from who Jackie Chan was. This is the thing that took me the longest to understand when I went through the record, and I want to be specific about it because the general version is less accurate than the specific one. It was not that the Academy gave him skills he then applied to his career. It was that the Academy became the structure inside which everything else operated, the template through which he processed every subsequent decision about what his body could and could not do, every question about whether to stop or continue, every moment in a hospital corridor where a doctor was being careful with his language and the man on the table was calculating something the doctor was not factoring in. What the man on the table was calculating was this: that the production had a schedule, that the schedule had a cost, that the people who depended on the production, the crew, the stunt team, the men he had been working beside in conditions that forged the specific brotherhood of the Hong Kong film world, were waiting, and that he had never, in 10 years at the Academy and 15 years in the film industry, found a way to be the person who made them wait because of something that was happening to his body. The part of this that I keep returning to, and I want to be direct about what specifically is staying with me, because it is not the injury itself, is the 6 weeks, not what he did in them, how they were counted, by whom. The production team counted them one way, as the minimum window required before they could safely resume. The doctor counted them another way, as the opening edge of a recovery that had no business being measured in weeks at all. And Jackie Chan, according to accounts from people who were present during his recovery, accounts that I cannot fully verify but that are consistent enough across sources to take seriously, did not count them at all. He marked time differently. He marked it by what his body could do on a given morning, cataloged against what it had been able to do the morning before, and when the gap between where he was and where the production needed him to be became small enough, he closed it. The how of that closing is what the record struggles to contain. I want to be straight with you about something before we go further, because the accounts start to diverge here in ways that matter. The broad outline is consistent. The injury happened. The recovery was faster than any medical projection would have supported, and he returned to the production. That much is documented in the general sense that it appears across enough sources, in enough forms, that the basic shape of it is not seriously disputed. What is disputed, or more precisely, what is simply absent from any single authoritative account, is the interior of those 6 weeks, what the recovery actually looked like on a daily basis, what he was told and what he chose to hear, whether the return was as complete as the production required him to present it, or whether the production proceeded on a version of completeness that was, in specific technical ways, a performance. I have 2 accounts that describe the same moment, the morning he arrived back on set, in ways that are consistent in their external details and completely different in what they report about his face. One account says he walked onto the set and the crew, 20-some people in various positions around the location, went quiet in the way crews go quiet when something unexpected happens, and that the expression on his face was ordinary, that he looked like a man arriving at work. The other account says he walked onto the set and the crew went quiet, and the expression on his face was something the person describing it did not have a word for in Cantonese or English, something between relief and warning, as if the face itself was communicating. Do not ask me anything about this. I cannot reconcile those 2 accounts. I am not going to pretend I can. Project A Part 2 was a production that required from its lead performer things that healthy lead performers found demanding. The location work in Hong Kong, concrete stairwells, real streets, rooftops of buildings that were not designed to be filmed on, moved at the pace that Hong Kong action cinema of this period moved, which was fast and relentless and shaped by a budget that did not allow for the luxury of waiting for someone's body to fully cooperate. The smell of the locations was the smell of working Hong Kong in the mid-1980s, diesel and salt air near the waterfront, cooking smells from the floors below whatever building they were working on, the specific chemical smell of pyrotechnics that settled into clothing and did not come out until several washes later. Between setups, the crew ate from nearby stalls, milk tea in glass cups, clay pot rice, the ordinary sustenance of people doing physical work through long days. Jackie Chan moved through these setups the way he had always moved through setups, as the person who needed to know what every other person on the production was doing, because he was also the person deciding what every other person on the production was doing, because that was the only model of filmmaking he trusted. He was writer and director and star and, in the practical sense that mattered most on this production, stunt coordinator. The people performing with him, 12, maybe 15 people in the more complicated sequences, were men he had worked with across years of productions. Some of them had come up through the academy system, some had come through the stuntman routes that ran parallel to the academy, the routes that were slightly less brutal in their formal structure and equally brutal in their practical demands. All of them operated under the unwritten code of the Hong Kong stunt world. You did not ask another man directly about his body. You watched, you adjusted, you covered if covering was needed without making it visible. They watched him on the first days back, the camera operator on the production. I am not going to name him because the attribution is one I cannot fully verify, later described what he saw through the lens during one of the first major physical sequences after the return. He said there was a moment mid-take when something in Jackie Chan's movement changed, not dramatically, not in a way the audience would ever see in the finished film. A fraction of a hesitation, a micro-adjustment in how weight was distributed through a movement the body had been trained to perform one specific way and was now performing a slightly different specific way. The take continued. The shot was used. But the camera operator, who had been watching Jackie Chan move through a lens for years at that point, knew what he was seeing. He was watching a man who had rebuilt the map. There are two ways to understand what Jackie Chan did in those 6 weeks, and I genuinely cannot decide which one I believe, and I want you to think about it and tell me in the comments which version lands for you, because I have been going back and forth on this for weeks, and I think there are people who watch these stories who will have an instinct about this that I don't. Version 1. The 6 weeks were enough. The body that had been trained since age 7 to recover from damage, to renegotiate its own limits, to treat the signals it sent as information rather than instruction. That body used 6 weeks the way other bodies use 6 months, because it had been built to do exactly that. The academy gave him something that no subsequent injury could fully take away, a physical intelligence that knew how to rebuild. Version 2. The 6 weeks were not enough. The return was a performance in the specific and not entirely comfortable sense of that word, a decision to present the production with something that looked like recovery because the alternative required becoming a person he had no idea how to be, a person who waited, a person who let the schedule adjust to the body rather than the body adjust to the schedule, a person who had, in 10 years on the floor of a practice hall in Hong Kong, never once been permitted to exist. I do not know which version is true. I suspect they are both true in different proportions, and neither one is complete on its own. What I keep coming back to is a sentence he said, not about this specific injury, but about the general condition of his career. It appears in interviews across different decades, in different phrasings, and the version I find most consistent with everything I have read about him is this: I only want to do better work. That's the star I follow. On its surface, that sentence is about craft, about the commitment to the work itself as the orienting principle, and I think that is exactly what it is, on its surface. But underneath it, if you have spent weeks with the record, with the Academy years and the Lowe failures and Yugoslavia and the ankle finished on camera in a painted cast, underneath it, I think that sentence is also about something harder to name. About a man for whom the alternative to the work was not rest or recovery or any of the things that alternatives are supposed to be. About a man for whom stopping in any version of the word required a kind of internal architecture that the Academy had never helped him build, because the Academy had not been in the business of building that. The star he followed was the work. The work was the thing that organized everything else. When the spine sent signals that should have produced a different calculation, the work was what the calculation defaulted to, because the work was the only destination on the map. He finished Project A Part 2. The film was released in August 1987. It performed well commercially. The action sequences that audiences saw, the ones that required from their performer a spinal column that had 6 weeks earlier been described in careful medical language as significantly damaged. Those sequences are in the film. They are not noticeably different from the sequences that preceded the injury. The physical fluency reads as complete. Whether it was complete in the way that word means medically is a question the film does not answer and the production records do not address. What the film contains is the performance. What the performance contains is something harder to categorize, the specific and accumulated result of a man who had been trained since childhood to close the gap between what the body could do and what the work required, deployed in full over 6 weeks and then put on camera. The doctor who held the X-ray up to the light in that hospital corridor in February 1986, I have found no record of what he thought when the film was released, whether he saw it, whether he recognized in the sequences on screen the body he had been looking at through the film 8 months earlier. What I find myself thinking about is not whether the 6 weeks were enough in any measurable sense. What I find myself thinking about is that morning, Jackie Chan on the examination table, listening to a doctor being careful with his language, the doctor describing in the vocabulary of medicine a set of physical facts, and the man on the table who had been taught at age 7 that physical facts were not conclusions but starting points, who had been shaped by 10 years of that teaching so thoroughly that the shaping was not separable from the person, that man asking quietly when he could go back to work, not because he did not hear what the doctor said, because he had another map entirely, drawn in a practice hall in Hong Kong on worn wooden floors before most of the people in that hospital had been born, and on that map the answer to the doctor's careful language was not recovery, it was again.